They called him a terrorist. But for millions, he was the heartbeat of Kenya's freedom. His name, Dedan Kimathi Waciuri, the man who dared to challenge an empire that ruled the world. To understand Kimathi, you must first understand the Kenya he was born into. A land stolen, people broken, and a future chained. It was 1920, in the green hills of Nyeri County, that a child was born under the shadow of British rule. His parents were poor farmers, surviving on soil that no longer belonged to them. The British settlers had taken the best lands, the fertile ones, pushing native families into barren reserves. From an early age, Dedan Kimathi learned the meaning of humiliation. He saw his people bow before strangers who called them savages. He watched men beaten for walking on the wrong road. He watched women taxed for living on their own land. And he decided he would never kneel. Kimathi was sharp, intelligent, disciplined, restless. He joined school, learned English, read everything he could find. The more he read, the angrier he became. Because every book told him the same thing, that he was supposed to be less than human. He wrote in his diary, "The problem of Kenya is not ignorance, it is injustice." That diary would one day become a weapon more powerful than a gun. After school, he worked as a teacher, then a clerk, even joined the colonial army for a short time. And that's where he learned how the empire fought, how it moved, how it planned, how it controlled. He took notes, not to serve them, but to one day defeat them. As he grew older, the rumors spread, villages whispering about secret means and the dream of freedom. And in those whispers, Kimathi found his calling. He joined a secret movement of men and women who had nothing left to lose. Farmers, workers, dreamers, all ready to reclaim their land and dignity. That movement would soon shake the British Empire itself. In that moment, the teacher became a soldier. The quiet clerk became the commander. And Dedan Kimathi became the lion of Kenya. He knew what awaited him: death, betrayal, suffering. But he also knew something greater, that freedom, once awakened, could never be killed. Before the world feared his name, Dedan Kimathi had already declared war, in his heart. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, so more people can learn about the heroes who shaped Africa's freedom. Now, let's continue the story. The whispers of rebellion had turned into a storm. The Mau Mau movement was no longer just a secret. It was a fire spreading through the forests of Kenya. And at the center of that fire stood one man, Dedan Kimathi. He had risen from teacher to leader, from dreamer to fighter, but this was no ordinary war. The British called it an uprising. The people called it a liberation. For generations, the Gikuyu, Embu, and Meru had watched their lands stolen, their cattle taken, and their pride crushed. Now they fought back, not with tanks or planes, but with courage, discipline, and the will to be free. Kimathi became Field Marshal of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, the heart of the Mau Mau. He led his men deep into the forests of Aberdare and Mount Kenya, where the empire's reach grew weak. Every tree became a shelter. Every night, a battlefield. Every oath, a promise never to surrender. They swore loyalty to the land, to each other, and to freedom. Their code was simple. If we die, our children will live free. Kimathi wasn't just a warrior. He was a strategist, a poet of resistance. He kept a diary even in the jungle, writing about unity, justice, and the dream of a Kenya where no man ruled another. He believed education and discipline would outlive bullets. But the British feared him, feared the idea he represented. To them, he wasn't a soldier. He was a virus infecting the hearts of Africans with hope. So they struck back with brutal force. Villages were burned, families torn apart, thousands imprisoned in concentration camps. Propaganda called the Mau Mau barbarians, terrorists, savages. Yet in the forests, Kimathi's men fought on, hungry, wounded, but unbroken. Every gunshot was a message, every captured soldier, a martyr. The British Empire had the power, but Kimathi had the people, and that made him dangerous. Even as hunger, betrayal, and fear grew around him, Kimathi refused to bend. He told his fighters, "Better to die on our feet than live on our knees." The war was no longer about land. It was about dignity, about proving that an African could stand eye to eye with the empire and say, "No more." And from the depths of those forests, Dedan Kimathi became more than a man. He became a legend, a name whispered in the dark and shouted in freedom songs. But legends, no matter how powerful, always face their greatest test. And Kimathi's test was coming. The empire was trembling. but it refused to fall quietly. By 1956, the British had thrown everything they had against the Mau Mau, thousands of soldiers, spies, and informers. The forests that once protected Kimathi were now traps. The fighters were hungry, wounded, and outnumbered. The British called him Kenya's most wanted man. They printed his face on posters, offered rewards for his capture, and spread lies to turn his own people against him. But Kimathi kept moving, one step ahead, guided by instinct and faith. He believed freedom was close. He believed the empire was breaking. Then came betrayal. One cold night, wounded and weak, Kimathi was cornered near the forest of Nyeri. He was shot in the leg, overpowered and captured. The man who had once made the empire tremble was now bleeding on the ground. But even then, he did not beg. He looked his captors in the eye and said, "You can imprison my body, but not my spirit." His trial was a performance. The colonial court had already decided his fate. To them, he was a criminal. To his people, he was a king. Kimathi stood before the judges dressed in leopard skin, the symbol of courage and African pride. He spoke calmly, fearlessly, knowing every word could be his last. He told them, "We are fighting for the land of our birth, the land of our ancestors." The verdict was death. The date was set, February 18th, 1957. That morning, they led him to the gallows in Kamiti Prison. No one knows exactly where they buried his body. The British hid the grave, afraid that even in death, Dedan Kimathi would inspire rebellion. And they were right, because his death did not end the struggle. It ignited it. His final moments became a story whispered through generations, a story of defiance, dignity, and the unbroken spirit of a nation. As the rope tightened around his neck, Kimathi's last words echoed like thunder. "Freedom will come to Kenya, and it will never be silenced again." They killed the man. But the idea, the fire, refused to die. Kenya won its independence in 1963, 6 years after Kimathi's death. But the man who had lit the fire of freedom did not live to see the dawn he fought for. His grave remained unmarked, his body hidden. The empire feared that even his bones could awaken rebellion. Yet history has a way of correcting its silence. Years later, Kenya rose to honor him. Statues built, streets renamed, his face printed on money. Children learned his name not as a rebel, but as a hero, the Lion of Kenya, the man who refused to bow. Today, Dedan Kimathi stands among Africa's greatest, beside Mandela, Lumumba, and Sankara, men who proved that courage can outlive bullets. He once wrote, "I would rather die for freedom than live as a slave." And that is exactly what he did. Dedan Kimathi's body may rest in the soil of Kenya, but his spirit walks wherever people rise to say, "We will never kneel again."